Welcome back. We are joined again by Alastair Crooke, a former British diplomat and expert on the Middle East, and I would highly advise to read his Substack, a Conflicts Forum, and I've left a link in the description. And well, actually, thank you for coming on. What I want to discuss with you is actually, some of the articles you've been writing, as I really want to unpack what is happening now in East Asia. Because the war on Iran, it appears to be, well, a real powder keg. That is, the war is widening, it's expanding, with many of the conflicts being quite interconnected. We see, of course, Iran, Israel, the Saudi Yemen component. We see now attacks on Saudi oil from Iraq. We have a possible conflict now between Iraq and Kuwait, crisis in Lebanon, Syria, possibly regime change in Bahrain. One looks that it could even be a possible Iran-Ukraine component now, as we see Iran might even start to strike EU energy projects in across the Middle East, because they see Zelensky as being managed by the West. So, in short, the US appears to have started something that will be very difficult to put back together. I was just wondering, how are you reading this situation in terms of this, I guess, spiraling out of control?
Uh, well, you've hit the nail on the head. I mean, it's mildly on flame at the moment, but it is on flame throughout the region. And Trump and his attack on Iran is responsible for this upsurge in, if you like, conflicts and destabilizing. They are, as you say, all interlinked, but they also all have separate agendas. This is what makes it impossible now, in my view, for the United States to get an agreement with Iran. I mean, there are other reasons too, but I mean, it's become a really complex matrix of interests and agendas, which, before it was a binary, negotiation between Iran and the US. And now even Trump is saying, well, in future, now we've got to have the Houthis. Remember, it wasn't so long ago, he said, well, we've got to have Hezbollah. Hezbollah called me up. And I said, you have to join in the talks. I mean, that's a joke, of course, but I mean, it all sort of underlines the complexity. So if you start with the most complex part, or the most complicated one from the US perspective, it will be Yemen. And what happened, just to give a little background to your listeners, if that's all right, is it really, there's been a ceasefire underway with Saudi Arabia, and also there has been a siege by Saudi Arabia of the Houthi Ansar part of Yemen for more than 10 years, siege on ports and airports. And of course, the Houthis strongly resent and object to this. Well, what triggered it all was that they had prepared the delegation to go and attend the funeral commemorations for the assassinated supreme leader in Iran, and were invited. And the Iranians sent a civil airliner to Sana'a Airport, who were sending a civil airliner to Sana'a Airport to collect the delegation to go and attend the funeral. Saudi Arabia said this was against their siege, so they bombed the airport, Sana'a International Airport, to prevent the plane landing. In fact, the plane did land at Hudaydah, and the delegation went to Iran and returned. And as a consequence, then, we're closely on the verge of war between Yemen and Saudi Arabia. So that's really why it came into being. And so Yemen then declared, rather along the Iranian lines, okay, siege for siege. You've imposed for 10 years a siege on us. We impose a siege on Saudi Arabia. And that meant effectively the closure of the Red Sea to the ports of Saudi Arabia. Please note, because I think it's important that it doesn't mean the closure of the Red Sea to all shipping. It means the closure of the Red Sea to Saudi shipping. Now, there are a few wrinkles in it. The Saudis have tried to slip a couple of tankers through towards the Suez. And two tankers have been struck that were heading towards Bab al-Mandeb by the Yemenis. But what the Yemenis are now doing is effectively they are warning empty tankers coming to the Yanbu port facility and saying, go back, don't come here because you will be stopped. So this is a major affair. The total oil passage through that Yanbu facility, I think, was something between 6 and 7 million barrels a day. And that certainly will no longer be flowing into the Western market. And that has been much exacerbated by the attack on the Jizza refinery, the Aramco refinery, close to the Red Sea in Saudi Arabia. Now, this is not just any refinery attack. I'm saying that because we're so used to, in the Russian context, there'll be reports that there's been another attack on the Russian refinery and, and lots of black smoke. And then when we look at it more closely, we find, the damage was repaired in a few hours and it's back in operation. With the Jizza refinery, first of all, it's not just the refinery. It is the refinery. It is an all singing, all dancing, does everything refinery that is the most modern in the world, apparently. But it not just, distills oil products, it does a lot more, and it is burning, and it is still burning, and it is burnt, really burnt. So when you look at this, so the Saudi oil loss, I mean, if you take it all together, is probably about getting on for maybe 20% of the oil that was passing through the Red Sea. You add that to the Hormuz amount, which is much more. It varies from day to day, but is probably about another 22% of world oil supply. You're talking about a big hit to the world oil supply, a really big hit. And what is so strange is, the Saudis have said nothing. If you read the European press, which you perhaps have done, if you find a reference to this, it's rare indeed. It's just almost as if it's pushed off the news agenda. A few pictures of something burning, but no sort of context given to it, no sort of sense. And in fact, the whole of Europe is really in this strange sort of environment, psychological environment, where, I mean, they do, there's no mention of it in the press, very little. Europeans have not been sort of prepared or briefed that, a crisis could come. For the first time today, there was a few comments saying, well, clearly this winter there is going to be a gas crisis. But in terms of diesel, in terms of gasoline and other things that drove from the Middle East, almost nothing. So, I mean, this is obviously a strategy, not to frighten people, and really fingers crossed that enough could be drained out of the strategic petroleum reserve in America just to keep through and to pass through this awkward period. But even there, I mean, now unpleasant things coming out that actually the Americans, the strategic limit for drawing on the reserve, the absolute minimum set by the military authorities, like in 250 million barrels, they're below that, and they're still drawing down on it. And they now trying to manipulate the markets by saying, look, it's all right, we can go down perhaps even as much as 70 million barrels per day, draw on it from this. And the experts are saying, it's not just one single, supply of oil reserves. It's lots of caverns and the structures, and we've got different grades of oil in different caverns, and it's much more complex. And that many of these caverns are likely to collapse if you like, the oil is taken out, the pressures will then push in the sides inevitably because the oil was stabilizing. And then many of these caverns are in danger of collapse. Anyway, all this has been ignored in the interest of keeping markets content, keeping the price of oil a little bit down from its 100%. So that's a major element in this scope. Then another one, which is hardly really noticed, but is in Iraq, where the prime minister went to see Trump. It seems that he gave Trump some indications that, American oil companies would be favored in Iraq against existing competition, something of that sort, maybe. But also said he was going to disarm the Shia militias, the Hashad al-Shaabi, by the 30th of September. And they said, no way would he going to. So there's a lot of problems there. And Iran special forces are fighting in Iraq across the border from Turman Shah. They're fighting there against the Kurds regularly. Iranian special forces have gone in and assassinated 7 or 8 leaders of the Kurdish militia there, and they bombed them and they've attacked their supplies and supply line. So Iraq is in a state of some disruption. I always say that. It might be yet worse. I think, the funeral showed very clearly the strength of, I don't call it Iranian power because it's not really Iranian power, the civilizational force of Iran. I mean, millions turned out, of course, at Kabul, but also at Qom and even Isfahan. So, I mean, we had, 15 million or so turn out for these funerals. Many of them walked there to these funeral arrangements. I mean, it was extraordinary, the outpouring. And Iraq is a Shia country. And the supreme leader in Iran was the Mahdi, that is the guide, the source of emulation for many, if not most, of the Shia in Iraq. So it was their religious leader that was killed, as well as Iran's religious leader that was killed by the Americans. And so it's not in a very stable situation if they try and disarm. America is trying to force the disarmament in Iraq, trying to force the disarmament of Hezbollah in Lebanon, and thinking to use Syria somehow to this end that the Syrian militia will come down and attack some of the Shiite villages on the borders between um, uh, Lebanon and Syria. I don't know whether that will happen. I have rather some doubts about it. But Turkey too is in a state of uncertainty. Although Turkey says it supports the idea of, or at least not that strong, actually, I think Turkey, Erdogan says he doesn't oppose a negative is negative. The doesn't oppose Syria being involved in Lebanon, but he's clearly got misgivings, and he's introducing radar and other aspects into Syria, right down to Damascus. And the Israelis are threatening him with war and saying, we won't allow that. So we have that. And the other thing, which is, again, barely covered in European press, is what's happening in West Bank. There is a clear attempt by Smotrich and Ben-Gvir and the Messianic component, the national religious, and the others, not the Hasidic. The other, the Messianic element of Likud and the government, to create a crisis for the elections in October. The Ben-Gvir and Smotrich seem to believe that this crisis will allow them to get rid of the Arabs from the West Bank and take it and introduce settlements, more settlements, both there and in Gaza. And so the West Bank is poised for a really difficult period. It's already happening. There's almost civil war taking place in parts of the West Bank. And so it could get a lot worse. So that is also a problem. And Gaza, they're about to put the Gaza population into these controlled and safe area, concentration camps, effectively, in Gaza. So everything is boiling, as Netanyahu said so to meet Trump tomorrow in Washington.
Well, thanks for unpacking that, because they are it is getting not just boiling over, but it's getting awfully complicated as well. But Trump, he was making these comments that because he has to respond somehow to the lack of progress in Iran. So will he escalate, de-escalate? It's always unclear what he's going to do. He made the point he was going to open the gates of hell, which suggests a dramatic escalation. And indeed, you do see some movement of these refueler tankers. And again, the US isn't pulling back. So, either it's going for that escalation, or by preparing for a major strike, or it's looking to walk this back, as some of Trump's advisors apparently have recommended, given that the weapons are becoming depleted. There's no convincing path to victory. But if the US decides to go for a huge strike against Iran now, what is the chance of Iran joining? No, sorry, of Israel joining in? Because the Israelis appears again to have sit this one out, this new round on the war on Iran. But to what extent do you think Netanyahu wants to bring Israel back into this war?
Netanyahu desperately wants to bring Israel back on the war and to persuade Trump to attack its infrastructure. I suspect he's going to say, we have new intelligence to suggest the Iranians are proceeding with their nuclear program. I mean, it happens regularly all the time. I'm just amazed that Washington falls for it. But anyway, he's probably going to say that, and he wants the infrastructure. it seems like what brought it to an end was that Brad Cooper, who's in charge, the commander of CENTCOM, was pretty adamant in saying, look, just going on bombing around Hormuz is not going to change the Iranian position on negotiations or anything else. It's actually only wasting our very rapidly depleting weapons supplies, really reducing them rapidly. Um, and um, and then, I mean, if you take that off the table, then what have you got left? What you got left is Pickaxe Mountain, which Israel says with, I'm not sure if they have really any intelligence yet, or anyone has any idea where this 430 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium is. It was at Fordo, it seems, on the 12th of June, when Trump bombed Fordo and other Iranian nuclear facilities. I think it's unlikely it's Fordo. Pickaxe could be where it is because Pickaxe is deeper and more structurally stronger than any of the other sites. But no one, I think, knows. And I don't really believe that they have solid intelligence on this. I may be wrong, but I just don't believe it. So, I mean, these things are not inviting targets. I mean, first of all, to bomb Pickaxe, it's a solid granite mountain, very steep slopes, and 1,000 meters down to the working level. And the experts say, well, to bomb this, we have to sort of drill down 2 to 3 meter vertical shafts by bombing till they get that 1,000 meters. And then they'll drop a nuclear weapon down it and it will blow the whole thing up. I mean, this is fantastic. I mean, this is sort of science fiction, not serious. I don't believe it's serious. I mean, imagine trying to sort of shape a little vertical hole into a steeply sloping granite mountain. It's just, the thing will bounce off the bombs. Anyway, I think that'll be a gift to Iran. And then as they put troops on the ground in Isfahan or somewhere, go and seize Isfahan and take the tunnels, I think that would be a huge gift to Iran. That the troops would be captured or kept. Americans, there will be a large loss. So there's no, I mean, this is why I've written that actually the military war, the back of it has been broken. I mean, America is running out of the wherewithal for a major operation, run out of the wherewithal, and it hasn't achieved any change. In fact, the opposite has happened. That the Iranians have become more resilient and tougher in their position. And I argue, and have argued, that they completely have the Iranian situation back to front. They just don't understand because they keep arguing that the situation is that they've got a very hard line leadership. And the ordinary people are just desperate for some sort of solution they want to get out of this. And actually, it's the reverse. The leadership are pragmatic. They may be tough, but they're pragmatic. But it's the people on the ground, particularly the young, who are saying, why are we talking to the Americans at all? Actually, what we want is vengeance. They are tough, and they're giving the negotiators quite a hard time. I mean, they were attacked. They weren't damaged, but they were not popular. So I don't think there isn't going to be a change on the posture. The Iranians already said we're not negotiating with the United States, and we will not negotiate with them as things stand. So, I mean, there hasn't been a change in posture. So we wait and see what Netanyahu comes. And as I say, I think what he is going to go and say is you need to restart the war, and you need to attack infrastructure. Infrastructure. They're very careful in their words on this. Infrastructure, the word and the ability of the state to provide services to its citizens. In other words, they're calling for the complete destruction of the state. I mean, that must be the definition of a state that is unable to provide any services to its people. So that's what I think they're going to say. I'm not a, lots of people think this is going to be, slam dunk and Trump will agree with it. I'm not one of those. I think that Trump has an inkling, if it penetrates through to his mind, that you know this hasn't been going well, and it is not going well in terms of the polls in the U.S. I mean, the latest polls that show a catastrophic fall in the standing of Israel amongst Americans. I mean, CNN comes out with it very clearly. It says, we've never seen anything like it. The drop off in support for Israel across the board is, stunning. And the other, even Fox puts it up. So I think, there is a new vibe in Washington. I only call it that. I mean, it's not a strategic thing, but I think there's a vibe which says, this, and I think even the Wall Street Journal said there wasn't anyone at the meeting the other day that thought continuing the war is a good idea. And so I don't think that Trump, we don't know what hold Netanyahu has over Trump exactly, but I don't know that it's a sort of open and shut case that he will do what Netanyahu wants. So what will happen? I just think that I imagine that he thinks he can just go back to the MOU as is, as it would be left it, and that he can just take it up and say, well, we're negotiating on that. I don't believe that. I don't think that that's possible. I don't think it's possible because he discredited the MOU so completely, and because he lied about it and continued to lie about it and walk back every provision in it. I don't think why would the Iranians just simply go back to this? Why would they agree to a halt in the war simply for America perhaps to rearm and re-prepare and come back in September and decide now the weather was cooler that they could do some military operation in the area? I think the Iranians probably wouldn't accept that so easily. So, this whole question of language I wrote about, the whole language, I'm shocked when I hear what they're saying on Fox News and things about, they're all evil. They're all just a gang of thugs. They're not really human beings. I mean, this, Manichaeanism, it's so powerful. And I've always remembered it from earlier. Think back to Carl Schmitt and Leo Strauss. They always said the main aim was to blacken your enemy so completely, so thorough that no one could negotiate. It was not possible to negotiate with them because they're evil. How do you sit down with evil? How do you allow evil to emerge, if you like, in a stronger position? You don't. And that was their purpose. And of course, Israel plays that tune all the time. Iranians, evil, they have to be defeated totally, completely. But it does stop your ability to negotiate anything, particularly with a sophisticated country like Iran, by just saying they're so evil all of the time. And so that, taken with the sort of widening of the regional wall, means that I don't think, unless Trump did one thing, which would be to provide real concession, major concession on Hormuz and on Lebanon and all of these other areas, and front load it and offer it in advance. because no one believes him when he says, whether things work out, you get all your money and blah, blah, blah. I mean, no one believes that, either in Russia, China, or in Iran anymore. I mean, the American ability to negotiate in the old-fashioned diplomatic idea of this mission, I think is gone. I mean, we're in a new era. Everyone knows he doesn't pay any attention to laws or international law or norms or Congress. So he does what he wants. And so he's made clear his animus towards Iran and everything Iran stands for. So why would you negotiate? So I don't honestly know what he's going to do in those circumstances. I mean, he beyond unpredictable. I mean, he's not altogether there. So we have to wait and see. And I'll be there tomorrow, and then we may learn a little more.
Yeah, I often cite the work of Walter Lippmann on propaganda to, because he tended to focus a lot on this framing of good versus evil. He made a point that it was a great way of mobilizing the public and resources for war. But once it was time to embrace a workable peace, it essentially made it impossible, because once you portray your opponent as pure evil, how can you possibly make compromise? How can you see things from their position? You can't put yourself in the shoes of evil. So this was his main concern, looking back at World War One, the Bolshevik Revolution, and the Russian Civil War. This was essentially the conclusion in most of these wars: the danger of portraying your opponent as being this pure evil. Unfortunately, we do it with Iran, the Russians, and I think this kind of propaganda, it's coming back to harm us when it's time to make peace.
I would just, if I just quickly intervene, I think this is really an important question. Michael Vlahos has looked at one. But my question is, when did this occur? Because after all, I mean, America was founded as, I won't say messianic, although it was partly messianic, but a millenarian society that was the Redeemer nation, bringing liberty and democracy and all these benefits to the world. And at some point, it turned radically Manichaean, black and white. The most obvious case was not with Trump, but Biden. I don't know if you remember when he was in Prague, and then certainly afterwards at Liberty Hall, when he was speaking, and the whole thing was in some somber red light. It was really, a sinister looking aesthetic. That he spoke in front of this symbolic place to say that, Putin was evil, Russia was evil, and we were the light and the good, saving civilization. I mean, when did this actually happen? And I don't know, but it's an important question. It seems to me that that America slipped into this. Was it with 9/11 or something else that it changed? I don't know. Anyway, that's just a by the by, but it's an important aspect. I think what you said about before about the consequences of it, because it's not just Iran. I mean, it's the same with Russia, but obviously China too, but in a different way. But I mean, the West is just isolating itself into this little bubble, this sealed retort of sort of virtue. We are virtuous and we are the good, and everywhere outside of us seem to be evil and bad, and we can't talk to them and we won't deal with.
I suspect the post-Cold War order contributed to some extent, because if you form a world order based on hegemony and you essentially make the argument that the hegemon is benign, it will serve the benefit of all, um, you essentially make liberal democracy a hegemonic norm. And I think this probably contributed, well, at least to some extent, because you usually have two ways of understanding the world. One, you would see the international distribution of power, creating power competition, but then you would recognize that peace means to put yourself in the shoes of the opponent, to figure out where you can compromise. But if you see the world as being this eternal character of states that determine whether or not they're peaceful, well, that was the entire ideology after the Cold War. That is the democratic peace theory. That is, because we're liberal democracies, we're more peaceful. So I think initially there was it, you can argue it came from a good place. That is the argument that we're going to pursue security in a positive sum game. We're just going to promote democracy and human rights, and then the world will become more peaceful. I mean, this was a very pervasive ideology for our hegemon. But what you essentially do is, if you say it's internal character of states, you will always see the weakness in others. So you'll attribute goodness to yourself and evil to others. So if it's internal character of states that create peace or war, then it's essentially all other states that either has to be converted, they have to be contained or defeated, because the era of mutual understanding and compromise, essentially appeasement. Why would good values seek to compromise with bad values? And I think this is at least part of the hegemonic piece. I think was made it too ideological, perhaps.
I did when we did the first talks with the IRM long ago, and we sat them both in a room together, the armed wings of both sides, and we thought that could be, lead to some sort of solution, just getting them together. Actually, it did the opposite. It was a disaster. It just confirmed in each their prejudice about the other. So we started again, and we look very much at the whole question of, why don't you sit down and say what your history is, how you understand your history, what you see to be the future? And they said, don't be so silly. You'll never accept that. You will just refuse it. Our history, that was the on the Catholic side. And but after a long persuasion, they did. And so you have two completely incompatible versions of history and incompatible visions of the future. That wasn't the point. The point was, and this is what's relevant to the situation today, the point was that at that point, you got to the right where you could say, look, I don't accept this man's version of history. I don't accept their vision for the future. But I do accept that this is a valid exposition of his people's interests. And if both sides could accept that the other had a point, we don't agree with it, we think it's totally wrong, but only then does politics become possible. The acceptance that the other person has a position made it possible. If you don't accept that the other person has a position, that they're just evil, then politics doesn't become possible.
Just think back in the 90s, at least, you would be able to say things which are common sense. For example, with the Russians, you could say, well, what are the strategic interests and security concerns of the Russians? And you would have a military intelligence and political leaders arguing, well, their main concern will be NATO expansion. Oh, and they might react quite negatively to this if this is what we do. This was common sense. Many people would say this. If you would repeat that today, there will be huge consequence, because you can't recognize that the opponent has security concerns, at least not being triggered by us. And the idea that they would respond to this would be dismissed quite quickly as some form of attempt to legitimize their policy. So it's very, I mean, if we brought back, if we look through the work of Kissinger, a lot of the things he would have argued, wouldn't be possible to say in the open anymore. But I wanted to just circle a bit back to what you spoke before about the Israelis wanting the US to go after Iranian infrastructure, because I see Trump has taken again to social media. He's making this point that, well, he made some AI work on bombing Karg Island. This is apparently what state leaders do these days, put out AI pictures on social media about bombing infrastructure. But again, he can retreat into his own reality if he prefers to. But Um, but but I was wondering, what are the possible risks here, though? Because only that strike by Yemen into Saudi Arabia's oil infrastructure. I mean, it's not just the whole disruption to the markets. It could be the Gulf states, retreating from the US-led alliance system. I mean, it could be the petrodollar at stake, and just a few. I wouldn't say minor strike. It was quite a powerful one, but there seems to be a lot at stake here. I was just wondering, because I'm trying to assess whether or not the concerns from Trump are genuine. I'm just wondering what is at stake here if if Trump decides to go down this path that is not just posting his AI pictures, but actually starts carpet bombing Karg Island, for example, which is critical for Iran's oil exports.
It is partly, I mean, it is, it's only a terminal. I mean, that's not where the oil fields originate. Often people think they are in Carb Island. They're not. And so it's just a terminal. And I don't think it will be impossible to sort of adapt that. I think the main thing is that by Carg Island is, the stupidity of this idea. I mean, how would you get your troops there? You're going to sail them down. It's the other end of Houthis, far end of Houthis, about 400 to 500 kilometers down. How are you going to get them there? You're going to fly them in? Is there a landing? Where would you land them? Carg Island comes under complete fire control of Iran from the cliffs opposite. I've actually been to Carg Island for some reason. So, there are the Iranian full of tunnels, full of artillery. So you come under full artillery control. Same, of course, with the Strait in the Hormuz. The temperatures, I think the Americans would melt in them if they did it now. I mean, we're melting in Italy, but it's more worse in Iran at the moment, and the humidity is incredible. They need 8 liters of water a day to survive in this thing. Where the supply is going to come from? How are you going to get them back? I don't think this has ever really been thought through, except by the people, in the element who know these things. But I don't think it's thought through by Trump or by even probably most of his team, Rubio and the people who really advise him on Iran, who, according to Maggie Haberman, she was asked in this interview, who are the people who really advise him? And she thought about that, and she said, well, I think Susie Weil, she has a lot of influence because he really trusts her. She's the chief of staff, former chief of staff of Netanyahu. And then she said, and then I would say it's Witkoff, the bubble cushion. And when she was asked, what about Hegseth? He said, what happens with Hegseth is he usually comes to those meetings with General Kane, the chief of general staff. They come together. And so Hegseth sort of stands back, doesn't engage in the real question of, is this a good policy or a bad policy for the United States? He just sort of brings in Kane, who is, and Trump loves real generals, on central casting, as he says. So he has a general there. And the general then just swamps him with technical things. So yes, of course, there could be a major attack on Iran, but it would require the following tanker aircraft to be positioned. We'd need the following missiles to be pre-positioned. So he talks technology, and we all know Trump gets bored with that in about 1 nanosecond. So, I don't think so. It looks like the burden of advice comes from Kushner, who has a direct line back to Tel Aviv. So I don't know that he, so what's being fed to him? oh yeah, it's easy. We have control of the airspace, dominate the airspace. I mean, this makes it very unclear. Now, the other thing your viewers should know, and we've written about it, is uh, in I haven't written about it, but Ashley has a long piece about the nuclear issue from the Hebrew press in the military and security commentators in Israel. And it is stunning because there are many of them, Ronan Bergman and all of these people, are obviously mm, mm, communicating with each other. I mean, they're very similar in the line that they're taking. And they're all just saying, this whole nuclear thing was a lie. There never was a threat. There is no threat. Iran hasn't got a weapon, and they're adamant. That Fordo and all of this was never destroyed. Obliterate it. It's surface damage yet, tunnels shut. But it's extraordinary to read the sort of vehemence by which they say, Netanyahu's just lied and lied and lied about this. And they give examples. And he said, when he wanted to support Trump's position that they'd obliterated these infrastructure, Fordo, Isfahan, etc., in June, no one would sign up to it, the experts. I mean, they're saying this explicitly in the Israeli Hebrew press. No one would sign up. And finally, Netanyahu was the only people he could find was the Atomic Energy Commission, and saying, will you sign up to it, to this being obliterated? And they said no. And then there was finally a sort of compromise last sentence, ambiguous sentence put in it. And they used this to say, yes, this was a productive, raid, and it set their facility back. But the uniform language, I really think this document that you put together is so important, and it should be seen and read by, the people in Washington that are giving advice on these things, because these are the experts on it in Israel, and this is what they are saying. And I'm sure Gavard, if she was still in office, Elsie Gavard, the former national security, what she called herself, she's the national intelligence coordinator. It would have been a great interest for her to see this. And I don't think this is picked up in Washington. Netanyahu's on his own and he's making these comments. And I'm sure he's going to repeat them tomorrow in Washington. Oh, yes, it's moving towards a new, they're restarting the program. We've got new intelligence that shows that. And all uniformly, the experts in Israel are saying, this is BS, not true. Have a look at it if you've got time. It's on the web, it's on the Substack. About the nuclear, but you can read all of it, who's saying what, and go your own conclusion. But it's pretty devastating that this whole thing is totally a setup. And largely, and we're just waiting now for the next chapter of the setup to be unfolded in Washington. But, will Rubio and others sort of dig this or bother to read anything like this? I don't know. Who knows?
Well, the threat of nuclear proliferation or humanitarian issues, it's always a good way of selling a war. The problem is once you solve the war, it's becoming difficult to walk this back. Anyway, it just seems like the United States, it's well, at least Trump has painted himself in a corner here because, well, going after the infrastructure is going to be problematic. A ground invasion, as you said, will you can't do supply and support. I don't see any good story here for what a victory could actually look like. On the other hand, it's now diplomacy is also going to become increasingly difficult because, yeah, as you said before, why would Iran even talk to the United States anymore? At least, if I was Iranian, I would demand a buy-in that is something immediate they have to hand over, for example, unfreeze some money or something, just to so there's some cost at keep abandoning the diplomacy all the time, because handing over this escalation control to the Americans, allowing them to decide when to start bombing, when it should stop, all of this is very dangerous for the Iranians. That is, if the US thinks it can just, well, turn off the war whenever it wants, it's going to go into war with a much greater ease. So I think, yeah, anyways, I think the US in a put itself in a very difficult spot now. Do you have any final thoughts before we wrap up?
Yeah, that you are absolutely right about this. They have escalatory control in Iran now, and they're not about to sort of give it up and allow United States to say, okay, now it's a period of ceasefire where we all rearm. Now we'll go back to war. Now we'll have a ceasefire. Now we'll go back to war. Um, I don't think, I think they have understood very clearly this is wholly adversarial for adverse for Iran. And so I think they will keep their escalatory governments. They may even go to war and extend the war. I mean, they are keeping cards in reserve. And it's not that, Israel is exempt. It's just its time hasn't come yet before that card might need to be played. So there's a lot forward to go. If Israel really wants to get involved in it, I think Iran is ready for that. It's not a threat to them. Actually, it is something that has been in the plan from the beginning.
Well, Alastair, thank you so much for your time. Almost kept you for a full hour, so thanks again.
My pleasure. Always